Rain fell gently over the dry fields of Calhoun County as Ellric Boone, a reclusive farmer with eyes carved by sorrow, opened the barn door to shelter the horses. He wasn't the kind of man who welcomed visitors. Change, even less. His days ticked by like a silent clock, milking before dawn, dirt beneath his nails by noon, and loneliness across the dinner table by nightfall. But that afternoon, as the raindrops pattered on the tin roof and the air filled with damp earth and memory, he saw a woman standing at the edge of the trail, holding a child and a gaze full of quiet desperation. Her name was Mirella Vane. Her dress was soaked and stained with mud, her blonde hair tied back hastily like she had fled without looking back. The little boy nestled against her chest, pale and watchful, was named Ansel. She didn't beg for food or cry for help. She simply looked at Ellric like someone who had run out of places to go, and maybe out of reasons to try. "Sir, I just need somewhere dry for the night. We'll be gone by morning." Her voice was soft, barely holding together. And yet something in her words stirred a long quiet place inside Ellric that he didn't know still existed. The barn became a makeshift shelter, cold but dry. Ellric watched them from across the room, lantern in hand, expression unreadable. Mirella wrapped Ansel in a worn quilt and settled onto a bed of hay. The boy said nothing, only stared at Ellric with the kind of silent curiosity that children who've seen too much tend to have. Ellric, without really knowing why, pulled over a wooden stool and sat nearby. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of things no one had the courage to speak. That night, Ellric dreamed of Letty, his wife who had died 8 years ago. In the dream, she too arrived at his door soaked and broken, with the same look Mirella carried in her eyes. When he woke up, drenched in sweat, the sound of Ansel's soft breathing pulled his gaze. Something inside him cracked open. That little boy, without a single word, had somehow handed Ellric a key to something long locked away. Outside, the storm worsened. But inside that barn, for the first time in years, Ellric felt something almost like warmth. What he didn't know was that Mirella carried more than sorrow. She carried a buried truth that had everything to do with him. By morning, the storm had moved on, leaving behind fog curling around the fence posts and puddles glistening across the dirt yard. Ellric stood at the kitchen window, coffee steaming in his cracked ceramic mug, watching Mirella and Ansel emerge from the barn. She held the boy's hand, her boots caked in mud, her shoulders tense like she was ready to be told to leave. But Ellric didn't say a word. He simply stepped aside, opened the front door, and nodded toward the small kitchen table. Mirella hesitated, her eyes scanning his expression, searching for some edge of danger that wasn't there. They sat quietly, the three of them. Ansel swung his legs under the table while Mirella sipped coffee like it was the first warm thing she'd tasted in days. Ellric ate in silence, but his gaze kept drifting toward the boy. There was something about Ansel, his stillness, the way he watched everything, that reminded Ellric of himself as a child. Raised on hard land, raised with silence. There was something familiar there, and it made him uneasy. Later that day, Mirella offered to help with chores. She chopped vegetables with practiced hands and milked the goats like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Ellric didn't ask questions, but the way she moved told him she hadn't always lived in fear. There had been a time, once, when she knew how to build a home. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice held a quiet strength that didn't match the worn look in her eyes. And Ansel, he never strayed far from her, his small frame always within reach, like the world outside her arms was too dangerous to trust. That night, after Ansel had fallen asleep on the worn sofa with a blanket pulled up to his chin, Mirella stayed by the fireplace. Ellric sat across from her, the firelight casting long shadows on the walls. She finally broke the silence. "My husband died in a house fire. That's what they said, anyway." Her voice cracked on the last word. "But there are things that don't add up. Things I shouldn't talk about." She didn't elaborate, but her eyes were full of something deeper than grief, something closer to fear. Ellric didn't ask for details. He just nodded once, slowly. He didn't like secrets, but he'd learned a long time ago that pain often comes wrapped in silence. He respected that. Still, as he sat there listening to the logs crackle, something Mirella had said stuck in his mind. That's what they said. That choice of words lingered like smoke in the air. Outside, the wind picked up again. But this time, it wasn't the storm Ellric was worried about. It was the feeling that he'd just let something into his home that carried more than sorrow. Something dangerous. The next morning, Ellric found himself watching the way Mirella folded laundry on the porch. Her movements were slow but deliberate, like someone used to doing everything with care, even when the world gave her no reason to. Ansel sat cross-legged on the porch steps, quietly humming a tune Ellric didn't recognize. There was a strange peace in that moment, but it sat on top of something else, like dust covering a locked trunk no one dared to open. Inside, Ellric pulled out an old cigar box from the cabinet above the stove. He hadn't touched it in years. Inside were letters, worn photographs, and a silver locket that had belonged to Letty. He didn't know what made him dig it out now. Maybe it was the silence Mirella carried with her, the way it echoed his own. Or maybe it was the way Ansel had looked at him that morning, eyes wide and still, as if trying to figure out where he fit into this strange, quiet man's world. That afternoon, Ellric rode into town to buy more supplies, something he usually avoided unless absolutely necessary. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he noticed Sheriff Braxton leaning against his cruiser, sipping coffee like he had nowhere else to be. "Haven't seen you in weeks," Braxton said, his drawl slow and easy. "Heard you got company out at the Boone place." Ellric didn't answer right away. He hated small talk, and Braxton knew it. "Just a woman and her kid. Look like they've had it rough," he finally said. The sheriff's smile faded. "Mirella Vane?" he asked. "That name sounds familiar." Ellric's eyes narrowed. Braxton rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly cautious. "There was a case about a fire. Her husband died. But there was talk. Folks saying it didn't look like an accident. And she disappeared the next day with the boy." Ellric said nothing, but inside, something shifted. He bought what he needed and rode back without another word. That night, Mirella was quieter than usual. She didn't notice Ellric watching her as she stirred the stew, her hand trembling just slightly. He couldn't tell if it was fear or guilt. But when she tucked Ansel into the small bed they'd made for him near the fireplace, Ellric heard her whisper, "You're safe now, baby. I promise." The words weren't just for comfort, they were a vow. And vows like that didn't come from nowhere. Later, Ellric sat alone in the dark kitchen, the lantern's flame flickering. He thought about the sheriff's words, about the smell of smoke, about the way Mirella's voice had cracked when she said, "That's what they said." And he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think before. Maybe she wasn't just running from the past. Maybe she was hiding from what the past was still chasing. Over the next few days, something began to shift in the air around the farmhouse. It wasn't dramatic, not a sudden storm or a raised voice. But Ellric could feel it. Mirella no longer flinched at every creak of the floorboards, and Ansel started leaving her side for short moments, wandering to the edge of the garden to chase butterflies or crouch by the chicken coop. It was quiet, yes, but it was the kind of quiet that hummed beneath the skin, like a melody you can't place but somehow remember. Ellric watched them more than he spoke. He noticed how Mirella's hands moved differently when she thought no one was looking, how she would reach up and touch her neck as if checking for something that used to hang there. Once, as she washed clothes by the well, he caught her staring into the water with a blank expression, like she wasn't really seeing the reflection looking back at her. He didn't interrupt. He knew that kind of gaze. It was the kind that came from ghosts you carry, not ones you see. Ansel had taken a liking to Ellric's old dog, Rufus. The boy followed the animal around like they were tethered by invisible thread. Ellric didn't speak much to the child, unsure of what to say to someone so small, so quiet. But one morning, Ansel handed him a smooth river stone he'd found near the barn. No words, just a shy smile, and the stone placed gently in Ellric's calloused hand. That small gesture stayed with him all day. It felt like something breaking open and something being built, all at once. That night, Mirella stood at the porch, wrapped in Ellric's old coat. She didn't speak until he stepped beside her. "I used to sing to him, you know," she said, her voice low. "Back when I believed the world would stay the way it was." She looked out at the dark fields, the stars dimmed by drifting clouds. The fire took everything. But the worst part wasn't losing him, it was realizing I didn't know who he really was. She didn't look at Ellric when she said it. She didn't have to. Ellric wanted to ask what she meant, but the words didn't come. Instead, he looked at her like a man trying to read a book in a language he used to know. Her story wasn't laid out in sentences. It came in gestures, silence, and the way her eyes darted toward the woods when she thought no one was watching. And then, just before turning in for the night, Ellric saw something he hadn't noticed before, a small burn scar along the inside of Mirella's left wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. A mark that didn't match her version of the fire, and raised questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Ellric couldn't stop thinking about that burn on Mirella's wrist. It wasn't the kind of injury you get by accident, not a kitchen mishap or a moment of carelessness. It was precise, deep, healed but not forgotten. The next day, while Mirella and Ansel were out feeding the goats, he slipped into the guest room where she'd been keeping a small travel bag. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe something to confirm the questions growing louder in his mind. Inside, he found a letter, creased and worn, addressed to someone named Verlin. The return address was from a town 2 counties away, and the date on the envelope was just 3 weeks before she showed up at his door. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. The handwriting on the front was bold and erratic, the kind of scrawl that hinted at urgency or threat. Ellric tucked the letter back where he found it, heart heavy with the weight of suspicion. That night, as Mirella stirred the stew in the pot and Ansel colored at the kitchen table, Ellric watched her with new eyes. He hated the feeling, this creeping doubt, but he also knew what it meant to lie by omission. And there were too many cracks in her story now to ignore. After dinner, Mirella surprised him by asking about Letty, his late wife. "Was it quick?" she asked, eyes soft, voice hesitant. Ellric looked down at his hands, thick fingers curled around a chipped mug. "No," he said after a pause. "Cancer. Took her slow, piece by piece." Mirella nodded, not out of sympathy, but recognition. "Pain has a way of hollowing people out," she murmured. "Sometimes what's left behind doesn't know how to be whole again." That night, Ansel woke screaming. It was the first time Ellric had seen the boy show anything close to fear. Mirella rushed to his side, whispering words Ellric couldn't hear. When the crying stopped and the room went quiet again, Ellric lingered by the doorway. Mirella looked up at him and whispered, "He dreams of the fire. Every night." But Ellric wasn't sure if it was the fire that haunted the boy, or something he saw in its light. Later, Ellric sat on the back porch, turning the name Verlin over in his mind. It wasn't common, and it stuck with him like a splinter. He made a note to ride into town the next day, to ask around. He needed to know what he was dealing with. If someone was still out there, if Mirella was hiding from someone dangerous, then danger might already be on its way. Inside, behind him, the lantern flickered. And from the woods beyond the fields, something, or someone, was watching. The next morning, Ellric saddled his horse before sunrise. The air was thick with the scent of dew and something else, anticipation. He left without waking Mirella or Ansel, riding hard down the back roads until he reached the edge of a small town called Nettle Hollow. It was the kind of place where names carried weight, and gossip lingered longer than memories. At the diner, Over bitter coffee and half a plate of eggs, Ellric asked the waitress if she'd ever heard the name Verlin. Her eyes shifted, and she stopped wiping the counter. "Verlin Doss?" she said, voice low. "He used to live out on Glover's Bend. Folks say he ran with bad people. Real bad. Word is he had a girl once, real pretty. She left him. Whole place burned down not long after. Nobody knows what happened to him since." Ellric nodded, his stomach tightening. He didn't ask if the girl's name was Mirella. He didn't need to. The pieces were falling into place, and they were sharper than he expected. By the time he got back to the farm, the sun was high, and Mirella was outside hanging linens. She smiled when she saw him, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ellric studied her for a moment before dismounting. "You ever hear the name Verlin Doss?" he asked, calm but direct. Mirella froze. Her hands dropped the sheet she was pinning, and her face went pale. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I went into Nettle Hollow," Ellric said. "Did some asking." Mirella didn't respond right away. Her fingers curled at her sides, trembling. "He's not supposed to know where we are," she said, almost to herself. "I made sure." Ellric stepped closer. "You need to tell me everything, Mirella. If there's something coming for you, something coming for him, I need to know now." That night, Mirella finally opened up, piece by painful piece. Verlin had been her husband, but not the man she married. That version had disappeared fast, replaced by something violent, manipulative, dangerous. She had tried to leave twice. The second time, she succeeded, but only because the fire gave her cover. She didn't start it. At least, that's what she told herself. But the flames didn't just take the house. They erased everything. Or so she thought. When she went to check on Ansel that night, his bed was empty. Panic rose like bile. She ran through the house, calling his name, but there was no answer. Ellric's chest tightened as he grabbed the lantern and threw open the front door. Out in the yard, the gate to the pasture was swinging open, and small footprints led straight toward the woods. The night swallowed the trees as Ellric followed the footprints through the tall grass, lantern in hand, Mirella right behind him, barefoot and breathless. "Ansel!" she called, her voice breaking against the wind. Her hands trembled so hard she could barely keep her balance. Ellric moved with the focus of a man who'd been through worse storms but never one like this. Every rustle in the woods sounded like a threat. Every shadow, a memory of something too late to stop. They found a piece of Ansel's blanket snagged on a branch near the creek. Mirella fell to her knees, clutching the fabric like it could tell her where her son had gone. "He wouldn't go far," she whispered, rocking slightly. "He knows better. He's never done this." Ellric knelt beside her, placing a hand on her back, grounding her. "We'll find him," he said firmly. But even he could feel something was off. The tracks didn't wander. They moved straight, with purpose, like someone was leading the boy. Further into the woods, they found cigarette butts crushed into the mud. Fresh. Ellric's jaw clenched. No one local came out here this time of year. Mirella stared at the ground like it had slapped her. "He's here," she said, her voice hollow. "Verlin. He found us." Her body shook, and Ellric pulled her up, holding her close. "We're not going to let him take that boy," he said. "But I need you steady now. You know how he thinks. You know what he'd do." They moved faster, breaking branches underfoot. Mirella began calling out memories, places Verlin used to take her when things were good, when he pretended to be human. A clearing near the rock ridge, a hunting cabin he used as a hideout. Ellric followed her lead, all the while scanning the dark for any sign of movement. The night pressed in tighter with every step, the trees leaning like they were listening. Then, up ahead, a flicker of light. Not moonlight. Firelight. Small, low, controlled. Ellric extinguished the lantern and pulled Mirella behind a tree. "Stay here," he whispered. "If it's him, I need to get close first." But Mirella didn't move. Her hand clutched his arm with a force that surprised him. "He'll kill you," she said, eyes wide. "He doesn't talk, he doesn't reason, he just burns." Ellric pulled away gently and stepped forward. The fire came into view, and beside it, a man. Tall, still, staring into the flames like he'd been waiting for something. And just behind him, Ansel stood barefoot in the grass, his small hand held tight in the grip of a ghost Mirella had tried so hard to bury. Ellric stepped out of the trees slowly, hands visible, voice calm. "Let the boy go, Verlin." His tone didn't shake, but his chest felt like it might. Verlin didn't flinch. He stood by the fire like a shadow with a heartbeat, one hand locked around Ansel's wrist, the other holding a lit match, flicking it open and closed. The firelight flickered against his face, revealing deep scars across his cheek, fresh and angry, like the past had left claw marks. "You got some nerve, coming out here like a savior," Verlin muttered, eyes locked on the flame. "You know what she did?" He jerked his head toward the woods, toward where Mirella hid. "She left me to die. Set the whole place on fire like I was nothing. Took my son. My blood." The words sliced through the night. Ellric didn't blink. "He's not yours anymore," he said. "He's hers. And he's not afraid of you." From the shadows, Mirella stepped forward, despite Ellric's silent plea for her to stay hidden. Her voice was low, steady. "You were never a father to him, Verlin. You used us. Broke things you can't fix with threats and fire." Her eyes locked on Ansel's. "Baby, it's okay. Mommy's here now." Ansel didn't cry. He didn't speak. But his body trembled under Verlin's grip. Verlin laughed, short and sharp. "You think words fix what you did? You think hiding behind some farmer makes you strong?" The match hissed as he flicked it again. "I came to finish what you started." He threw the match into the fire pit, which roared brighter for a second, casting wild shadows across the clearing. Ellric took his chance. In one swift movement, he grabbed the metal rake leaning near the tree line and swung hard, knocking Verlin backward just enough for Ansel to stumble free. Mirella rushed forward, scooping the boy into her arms. Verlin hit the ground but scrambled up fast, fury boiling in his eyes. "You don't get to take this from me again," he roared, charging toward them. But this time, Mirella stood in front of Ellric. Her hands trembled, but her stance didn't waver. "You already took enough," she said. Behind her, Ellric raised the rake again. "Ready." Verlin froze. And then, sirens. Far off but growing louder. Someone had called the sheriff. Maybe a neighbor heard the shouting. Maybe fate had finally picked a side. Verlin's eyes darted around, rage giving way to panic. And with a final snarl, he turned and ran into the woods, swallowed by darkness once more. But as Mirella held Ansel close, Ellric knew this wasn't over. Sheriff Braxton arrived minutes after Verlin vanished into the woods, his tires kicking up gravel as the cruiser skidded to a stop. 2 deputies followed close behind, flashlights cutting across the trees. Mirella held Ansel tight on the porch while Ellric spoke with Braxton near the fence line. "He's out there somewhere," Ellric said, his voice hoarse. "Still breathing, still dangerous." The sheriff nodded, jaw tight. "We'll send dogs at first light. Man like that doesn't just disappear. Especially not with a record." Inside the farmhouse, Ansel sat at the kitchen table wrapped in Ellric's old flannel coat. He was pale, but calm now, like a storm had passed through him and left only silence. Mirella crouched beside him, brushing his hair from his face. "I've got you," she whispered. "You're safe now." But her voice shook. Not from fear, from the weight of finally not running. Later, while the deputies combed the woods, Ellric and Mirella sat outside in the dark. Neither spoke for a long time. The fire in the clearing had been doused. The house was quiet again. But something between them had shifted. Ellric finally broke the silence. "He won't stop easy." Mirella looked at him, eyes tired but clear. "I know. But I'm not the same woman he left behind in those flames." She paused. "And you didn't have to stand between us like that." Ellric looked away, then back at her. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because that boy deserves a life. And because maybe I wanted to believe I still had something left to protect." The words hung between them, heavy and honest. Mirella reached out and placed her hand over his. No promises. No explanations. Just the quiet acknowledgement of everything unspoken. That night, as the house finally settled, Ellric stood in the doorway of the guest room and watched Mirella sleep curled around Ansel. The moonlight washed over them both, softening the lines of fear etched in their faces. He didn't move. Just watched. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about Letty. He wasn't thinking about loss. He was thinking about the future, and how it might look different than the one he'd resigned himself to. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring leaves along the edge of the woods. The search for Verlin would continue, and Ellric knew better than to trust that danger was gone just because the night had gone quiet. But for now, inside these four walls, there was warmth. A beginning. And in a life full of endings, that was something worth holding on to. 2 weeks passed. The leaves had started to turn, and the wind carried the first hints of winter. Sheriff Braxton came by one afternoon, hat in hand and expression tight. "They found him," he said. 20 miles south. Border town. Tried to hitch a ride out. Got into a fight. Stabbed a man. He's in custody now. Won't be walking out anytime soon." Mirella stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, and just nodded. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. Verlin was no longer a shadow on her heels. Inside, Ansel helped Ellric stack wood by the fireplace. He didn't speak much still, but he smiled more. He laughed once, just once, at something Rufus did, and it nearly stopped Ellric's heart. It was the kind of sound that filled rooms, even when small. Mirella watched from the kitchen doorway, a quiet smile on her face. It was the first time Ellric realized she didn't look tired anymore. Just worn in, like something slowly being restored. Mirella didn't say she planned to stay. She just didn't leave. One day turned into another. She helped clean the barn, replanted the winter vegetables, and taught Ansel how to gather eggs without cracking them. Ellric started leaving 2 cups of coffee on the porch instead of 1. Some mornings, they'd sit in silence and watch the sun crawl over the fields, letting the quiet speak for them. One evening, Mirella brought out a small box from her room. "I've been carrying this for years," she said, handing it to Ellric. Inside was a photograph, faded and curled at the edges, of a younger Mirella, holding a baby, smiling through bruises. "I kept it to remind myself who I needed to protect." She looked at Ellric. "But now, I think it's time I stop living like I'm still running." Ellric nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Instead, he folded the photo back into the box, placed it gently on the table, and reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. That night, as the fire crackled and Ansel slept soundly in the next room, Mirella rested her head on Ellric's shoulder. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, but it no longer sounded like something coming to take. It sounded like something passing by. And as Ellric sat there, staring into the flames, he realized something simple and true. Some people walk into your life like storms. Others, like seasons. But once in a lifetime, someone walks in like home.